what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, June 13th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and whatever's going to happen over the coming weekend as well here. There's a lot going on today. Got a lot of stuff in the talking points here, but the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And we're going to go right now into the war zones because that does need to be the leading topic. I know the corporate media is all aflutter about, the upcoming World Cup and where the World Cup will be next time out. And, you're being conditized here. This is a very interesting story because apparently Italian troops are now being deployed in eastern Syria. And apparently they're being deployed in support of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which, of course, is one of the U.S.-backed opposition groups. So can we call it a world war now when we have the Italians fighting in Syria? Meanwhile, the Syrian government forces are enhancing their anti-aircraft defenses on the Golan Heights. Obviously, when things uncork in Syria, which looks likely to happen in the very near future, Israel wants to hang on to the Golan Heights. Syria wants it back. And so there's probably going to be a very intense degree of fighting down there as well. Now, as you know, there's apparently a resolution in Congress, I don't know if it's been passed yet or not, that would have the United States formally recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. Now, Israel annexed the Golan back in 1981. No other government on earth recognized Israel's possession of that territory. But in the usual, we are completely dominated by Tel Aviv politics, our Congress is getting ready to say, oh yes, all that oil and gas is yours. And I don't think Syria is going to take that lying down here. Now, in a rare interview with the British media, Bashar al-Assad is blaming the British-created white helmets for the Douma chemical hoax. And it was a hoax. There were no chemical weapons, just a lot of dust. And Assad goes on to say that Great Britain, France, the U.S., and their puppets are responsible for the war in Syria. That's absolutely true as well. It was never a civil war. It was an attempt at an overthrow, going on 8 years now. Supposedly, there was some kind of an airstrike against Idlib back on June 7th. And the United Nations is demanding to investigate what reports that Russia did it. And a senior Syrian military expert is saying, this looks like it's another attempt to stir up the crisis in Syria. And Russia is saying exactly the same. They're saying, we know it wasn't us that did the airstrike. You're welcome to investigate, but we are suspicious that this is not about a real investigation, but another attempt to escalate the situation in Syria and allow the United States to basically start cranking up more military action here. Now, down in Iraq, remember, Iraq's going through a bit of a turmoil. They had an election where Muqtada al-Sadr's party won, and then the election was contested. Then the warehouse containing half the ballots was burned down, and everybody's saying, do over, do over, do over. Well, Muqtada al-Sadr and militia leader Hadi Amiri have announced that their political blocs will ally. Now, Amiri came in second in the elections. So just these two working together, they're well on their way to a coalition government. So Iraq is starting to strain at all that money and all that bloodshed. With Muqtada al-Sadr in charge of Iraq, technically it's another military defeat for the United States. It's all falling apart. It's falling apart in Iraq. It's falling apart in Syria. It's falling apart up in Afghanistan. We're losing this war campaign. We're killing a lot of people in the process, but we're not exactly proving to be victorious. We keep getting stuck in all these quagmires over and over and over again. Now, Turkey is in contact with Iran. Apparently, Turkey is getting ready to mount an operation at Kandil over the Kurds. And basically, they're in that northern Iraq region close to the Iranian border, and Turkey wants to coordinate with Iran over the military action. And Iran is going along with it because the Kurds are trying to infiltrate the Iranian border and, of course, cause terror attacks and so forth there as well. So those Kurds, they have been used and abused as instruments of U.S. foreign policy to try and balkanize Syria, and now it looks like it's not going to work on out. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're going to take a phone call from Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I like the way you opened up your show with, all these wars that just don't seem to end. Mike, I've never heard you actually say it, but do you think the politicians and whoever is calling the shots on all these stupid wars, I've never actually heard you say that they are complete and utter failures and idiots. Would you agree that's an accurate assessment?
I would say, first of all, they're sociopaths. You have to be to think war is a good idea and just be completely insensitive to all the pain and death you're causing. I don't know that they're necessarily idiots. There have been a lot of failures. I think the biggest one is a tendency to go along with the groupthink, get caught up in that, and the magical thinking, just always assuming the best case is going to work on out. And there is a notable lack of long-term, in-depth thinking about any of these policies, which I think is why so many of them are doing a face plant.
That's a good description. So this trade war is obviously starting to really ramp up.
Yep.
I live in Canada, and what Donald Trump is saying about using the United States as a piggy bank is actually true. The trade deficits in the United States are just astounding.
Yes.
It's amazing that, well, I mean, how do you can't hide this. A part of that $21 trillion is because of these trade deficits.
Yes.
And I have to wonder if this war policy and these perpetual trade deficits are intertwined somehow, because obviously the United States has to protect or wants to protect its U.S. dominance, U.S. Federal Reserve no dominance.
Yes.
At the same time, there is that broken window theory, which obviously we both know is crapola, but some of these Keynesian economic economists believe in these silly things. I mean, do you think there's some kind of maybe a tie there at all?
Well, there is no question that the war spending is a big reason our economy is in such trouble and it's overstrained. And a lot of that accumulated debt is war debt. Because they're spending more on the Pentagon. We don't really have the money. The U.S. government is trying to act like the books are all balanced and there's enough tax revenues coming in to cover all this, but it's an absolute lie. If there were enough tax revenues coming on in to cover the budget, they wouldn't be having to go back and borrow so much from the Federal Reserve or other creditors as they are having to do. So it's just another U.S. government lie. Now, I understand Trump's agenda was to make America great again. And I clearly have a different interpretation of what makes America great than Trump does. Because Trump seems to be taking the easy route of, we're just going to slap down all the other nations on earth and we'll be seen as the greatest nation on earth. I had a different idea, and that was that we repair our infrastructure, we rebuild our industry, we come up with new technologies and new products that could only be bought in the United States, and the money would come back on in, and so would the jobs. That was my idea of making America great, to make it truly great, not just relatively great.
Yeah. It takes time. right? I mean, you know, the tax cut wasn't that long ago, the corporate tax cut. You know, obviously that trade deficit, I mean, that's crazy. Your country, the people in your country are becoming more and more debt. Their standard of living is decreasing.
Yes.
The good paying jobs have been disappearing by, you know, the thousands by the week. And it's all tied, you know, to that massive trade deficit, because, I mean, you can't run a trade deficit like that. It just hollows out the economy and people get poor. You know, like I'm kind of on Donald Trump's side with that. And Canada's running a trade deficit too. So, you know, it all takes its toll. I mean, Japan's not running a trade deficit. Germany's not running a trade deficit. So, you know, it is unfair. It really is. I mean,
yeah, but
I
you need to understand from whence does this trade deficit come from? And here in the United States of America, it came from this attitude of the MBA generation that came out of the golden times of World War II, that we really didn't need to bother manufacturing in this country, that we could shop it off to other countries. Well, if you're manufacturing in other countries and then importing it back to U.S. domestic stores, that obviously is going to have a huge impact on the trade imbalance. And if you're not making anything the rest of the world wants to buy, yeah, that's really what it comes on down to. It has nothing to do with fair or unfair by other countries. It has to do with the fact that American manufacturing has been in decline for 30 years, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And that's the real problem. And because we are not self-sufficient on the items critical for our continued welfare, we are forced to import from other countries.
Yeah, the GMO is a big problem.
Yes.
But, you know, as far as your manufacturing is concerned, I wouldn't give up on them too quickly. I've installed a lot of you know, American food processing parts and whatnot. What's that? Maple leaf wieners, you know, like that.
Yeah.
Like, there was a big plant put in here up in Canada, and all that equipment, all of it, every single piece came from the United States, and it's all good quality stuff.
No, there is still manufacturing in the United States, and the United States does know how to make quality products. There just isn't enough of it, and it's going to take a while to get it up to the scale where we really would be on a much more even footing in terms of a trade war. I understand why Trump is doing what he's doing. I think he did it too soon.
Well, you know, I really do. I mean, I hope things get better, you know, because the idea of going around and just beating up on other countries and, you know, trying to make a buck or whatever, you know, this war agenda and all these war profiteering companies, you know, armaments and whatnot. I mean, there's no future in that, really. I mean, when everybody's dead, what are you going to do? Right?
True.
You know?
True.
It's true. Thanks a lot for your time, Mike. I appreciate it. Have a good show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, Al. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again. Over in Iran, they are vowing to reopen the Fordo uranium enrichment plant if the nuclear deal collapses. Now, obviously, as you know, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal unilaterally, but the other signatories to the P5+1 are trying to figure out a way to keep the deal moving forward because they thought it worked. Iran had ceased its nuclear activity, which was the big issue. But of course, Iran's nuclear activity wasn't the issue from the U.S. point of view. Figuring out a way to invade Iran was the issue. And that's why Trump has pulled on out of the deal, and they're starting to goad and provoke Iran, and we're starting to see the ramping up of the anti-Iran propaganda all over the place. So Iran is talking about reopening the uranium enrichment plant. That's a definite reference to the potential military program. And Iran is going to start constructing a redesigned Arak heavy reactor soon. Now, this is a heavy water reactor. They're working with China on this one. And what I mean by a heavy water reactor is if you think about the pressure vessel of a reactor, you will have moderators in there, you'll have control rods, you'll have the fuel rods. Up until Chernobyl, graphite was used as a moderator. And what they mean by a moderator is something that will slow the travel of neutrons from one fuel rod to the next so that they can be captured and trigger fission by the next fuel rod. Now, the advantage of a heavy water reactor, while it's more expensive to set up initially because of that heavy water, which has deuterium as the hydrogen in H2O, it's a more efficient moderator, and you can actually use unenriched uranium and get nuclear power out of this reactor. So it's a very good design, as good as any nuclear reactor can be. It is considered a problem with the issue of nuclear proliferation because, again, while it's expensive to set up, it's also a lot easier than a conventional light water fission reactor. But Iran is checking with China. They've been working on this project for a while. And Iran knows that oil underneath their soil is going to be gone someday. And they're trying to nuclearize, and they have that right because Iran has signed and ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which grants them the right to have peaceful uses of nuclear technology. Now, the United States also signed and ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And under that treaty, the United States is obligated to help Iran build peaceful uses of nuclear technology. And if the U.S. had really been concerned about a secret bomb factory under the power station, they could have just gone on in and said, we're here to fulfill our obligations under the treaty. We're going to help you pour the foundations and lay the piping and do the wiring and get your new power station all up, oh, spanky, shiny, pretty, and everything. Then that would have been the perfect way to make sure it was just a power station. But the real agenda here is to smash Iran the way that Iraq was smashed, to get Iran's oil on the world market for the US dollar, to shut down Iran's state central bank, and to basically remove Iran as a political rival for Israel in the Middle East. Over in Yemen, they've started the battle for Hodeidah, and I knew they were going to put pedal to the metal. When the United Nations started talking about taking over the harbor, taking over control and therefore pulling it off the battlefield, I knew Saudi Arabia and the U.S. weren't going to let that happen. So they have just hauled on off, and this is the biggest battle of this 3-year war. Millions of people are at risk, including 300,000 children who are now trapped between the opposing forces in this attack. So basically, with Hodeidah in the hands of Saudi Arabia, the whole northern part of Yemen is cut off from any possible source of supplies, humanitarian aid, food, water, medicine, anything. There's going to be widespread famine. It would count as a war crime to do that to these people. But we're in a state right now of apparently total war. Anything to win. Forget about the Geneva Conventions. Forget about humanity. We have to win at all costs, no matter what, even if it means starving an entire country to death in order to take it over. Now, as you know, Yemen has been dealing with this massive cholera outbreak, which nobody really knows where it came from. But it would not be the first time that cholera has been weaponized as a biological weapon. And the Doctors Without Borders organization set up a cholera treatment center in Yemen's northwestern Hajjah Governorate. And the roof of the facility was marked with all the red crosses. This is a medical facility. And the U.S.-backed coalition just blew it up, which tells me that, yes, they want that cholera outbreak to further weaken the people of Yemen. We're going way past the Nazis here in how these wars are being conducted. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to our show. We got our tech issues taken care of, and things are back online here. So Japan is going to cooperate with the U.S., South Korea, China, and Russia to solve the North Korean issue. Basically, everybody with an agenda and vested interest is now trying to crowd on in post-summit to make sure that their interests are being taken care of. Trump came out, though, with a very bizarre statement, following the summit. I mean, Trump was out there just enjoying the moment. He was looking good to the world. He finally had the mantle of a peacemaker. He's been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize now. And, of course, Kim Jong-un came away with the prestige of having had a one-on-one meeting with the President of the United States of America. But that's all that happened. They made some promises. But then Trump comes on out and says there's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Well, if that's true, then there wasn't before, because nothing has changed. There's not a single thing that has changed. I mean, yes, North Korea shut down their nuclear test site, but they had to do that anyway. They had just blown it into pieces. They couldn't use it anymore. Nothing has actually changed in terms of North Korea's weaponry or its long-range missiles. So it was a silly, silly statement to make. Now, Mike Pompeo is out there saying that the United States has decided on a timeline of total and complete and verifiable nuclear disarmament within 2.5 years, which may seem like a reasonable timeline, barring the unexpected. Now, following the summit, as you know, there was this 4-point agreement they signed, and Kim Jong-un decided he was going to sweeten the deal and told Trump that North Korea will destroy one of their missile sites. And, of course, Trump said, well, yes, that's great. Now, of course, North Korea has a lot of missile sites, and some are more important than others. And like the test mountain, where they tested their nuclear weapons, there may be one that's just so used up that it's not really worth keeping running anymore. But there's a long way to go for any of this. Meanwhile, peace is apparently bad for business because the military-industrial complex stocks took a nosedive after the Korean summit, which is silly when you look at how many other wars there are going on around the world. It's not like peace in North Korea has really changed the militant complexion of the planet. And the corporate media, doesn't matter what Trump does or doesn't do, they're going to go after him. And apparently some of the anchors over at MSNBC called President Trump a despotic dictator for working for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Now that is really kind of hostile here. But then again, if these MSNBC anchors can make statements like that and feel safe making statements like that, then obviously Trump is not a dictator. Not surprisingly, Netanyahu is praising Trump over the North Korean summit. Oh, yes, it's great. We're not going to have a war in North Korea. Well, since you've got all of these military forces that are no longer needed in North Korea, we might start wanting to think about getting into Iran. See, I think that's the real reason Trump went along with this summit. He got a phone call from Netanyahu saying, put North Korea on the back burner. We got to get Iran now. And we do seem to be headed that way. Now, here's an interesting little article. This came out of Activist Post and saying, is the Trump-Kim deal really peace, or is it a setup for war? And they're pointing out there are no real concrete agreements that have come out of the summit. It was just a list of, this is what we'd like to do, hugs and kisses, Kim and Don. That's basically it. There's a long way to go to see if it's actually going to work. And the bad news here is that Donald Trump is sending Mike Pompeo and John Bolton to negotiate the actual implementation of the summit with senior North Korean officials. The problem being that neither Pompeo or Bolton ever wanted the deal to go through in the first place. Remember, Bolton was out there screaming about, we're going to do the Libyan option, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. So it may be that Trump just wanted to look like he was a peacemaker, to steal some of Putin's thunder, And somewhere down the road, after Iran, North Korea will be attacked. And Trump will say, oh, well, gee, I tried. I'm not giving back that Nobel Prize. By the way, a little piece of history probably a lot of you don't remember. Back in 2016, Press TV ran a story about how President Barack Obama rejected an offer by North Korea to stop its nuclear tests in exchange for Washington's suspension of the joint annual war games with South Korea. So all the way back during the Obama administration, North Korea wanted this deal. Just leave us alone, stop rattling your sabers in our front yard, and we'll stop the nuclear tests. And Obama said no. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over the last couple of days and part of last week, I offered the observation that all of these sanctions and all of this chest thumping, arm twisting over Iran was actually isolating the United States. It's driving countries away from us and to seek new relationships. And apparently I'm not the only person who noticed that, because over in Vox.com they have an article on how Trump is killing Americans' alliances. And we're seeing it in the European Union over Iran, or we're seeing it with Canada, certainly over these tariffs. And people are trying to figure out what's going on with Trump, where, you know, he's buddy-buddy with North Korea all of a sudden, and being less than buddy-buddy with our traditional allies. Over in Ukraine, there is a warning coming on out from the Ministry of State Security of the Donetsk People's Republic. Apparently, they have intercepted intelligence information that Ukrainian forces are preparing a provocation in Donbass that threatens the lives of an incoming EU delegation. According to this report, an EU delegation has been invited to Ukraine by President Petro Poroshenko and will visit frontline areas in Donbass and Kiev between June 13th and 15th to study the humanitarian situation in Donbass. The DPR's ministry claims to have uncovered Ukrainian forces' plans to use an Igla manpad, meaning a man-portable air defense missile, to shoot down the delegation's helicopter and blame the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic in order to basically just haul off and do an invasion. And we have been seeing preparations by Ukraine for a major military intervention into these breakaway eastern republics. All they need is an excuse to make it look like they're the good guys and the others are the bad guys. And we've seen that throughout history. You know, we get the Germans to sink the Lusitania by loading it up with smuggled weapons, then claim, oh, it was an innocent passenger ship. Saddam's nuclear weapons, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. We've been lied into war so many times. And this could be another one. False flag attacks are an absolute reality of getting people to go to war. Think the Nazis and Gleiwitz. Now, the United Nations General Assembly today is supposedly voting, or may have voted, I need to check next commercial break, to condemn Israel for the Gaza violence. Now, the General Assembly, there are no nations with a veto. Now, as you probably all remember, the Security Council tried to deal with all of this horror and violence and illegal bullets that was going on. And Nikki Haley kept vetoing everything and kept throwing out all these resolutions saying it's all the fault of Hamas. You know, we should shut down Hamas, make them go away. And the resolution in the Security Council to have an investigation into what Israel's doing in Palestine was passed unanimously, but one vote, that being, of course, Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley's alternate resolution to blame Hamas for it and say that Israel is the good guy got only one vote, that of Nikki Haley herself. And the world is getting pretty fed up with Nikki Haley's antics, and I think Americans are realizing that she is whoring herself to Israel in the Security Council. That's her job. So the General Assembly decided to have a symbolic vote. And of course, Nikki Haley is out there trying to find some way to derail that because she can't veto it. And she's still out there screaming, no, 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 it's Hamas. It's Hamas are the bad people. You know, Israel's good. Israel's God's chosen people. They're the most moral army in the world. So let's see. I'm still not seeing a result on the vote, but I'm sure it's going to happen very, very soon. Probably a lot of nattering and gromishing going on in those hallways. A lot of arm twisting going on. You can't vote against Israel. You can't vote against Israel. It's amazing how much control Israel has. I was on the Richie Allen show earlier today, and we were talking about that incident in France where this community wanted to name this little tiny street, like almost an alley, after the Nakba. And immediately the Israeli diplomats goes, oh, it's inciting violence and support of the Palestinians, and the sign got taken down. But people are starting to notice now that they're not in control of their own countries, that the governments they've elected are not in control of their own countries. And they don't really like it. Nobody likes being under puppet rule. They didn't like it in Iraq. They didn't like it in Libya. They didn't like it in Yemen. Why should we be happy with it? There's no reason at all. Think about Vichy France and the resistance. Okay, now there is a backlash growing, though, because of the Bloody Monday massacre. I think a line was crossed, and Israel's absolute unrepentance and continuation of the atrocities is only fueling the fire. Apparently down in South Africa, their health minister, Mpo Palatse, was suspended after declaring South Africa's economic hub, Johannesburg, a friend of Israel. And he was speaking at the South African Friends of Israel conference, which is sponsored by Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Israel likes to go into these other countries and have these conferences, come be a friend of Israel. But apparently the city's mayor, Herman Mashaba, said that the comment was totally inappropriate and disappointing because it's one thing for him to say that he personally is a friend of Israel, but he doesn't have the authority to simply declare the entire city to be a friend of Israel, especially after what happened in Gaza on Bloody Monday. And so the health minister has now been suspended here. Over 300 prominent global figures accuse Israel of committing war crimes, which they absolutely do. It fits the definition. And they have come up with a joint letter signed by over 300 elected officials, legal scholars, academics, artists, faith leaders, and activists from around the world, including rabbis. And that's a significant development because it is part of the Jewish faith that you never, ever criticize your fellow Jews in public. And yet it's happening. We're definitely seeing it happening. Apparently signatures include 10 Israel Prize laureates, film director Ken Loach, author Alice Walker, Noam Chomsky. Over in Spain, the city of Oviedo has now disinvited an Israeli orchestra and ballet group that was scheduled to perform in the city's cultural program in the autumn. But the city has said, no, you're not wanted here, not after what's going on in Gaza. It's seen as a huge victory for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And last week, the city of Valencia approved a motion proposed by the Progressive Party Podemos to declare itself as an Israeli apartheid-free zone, becoming the largest city in the world to do so. Israel is not going to shut this up by screaming anti-Semite and Jew hater. They went too far. They jumped the shark. Israel is still trying to figure out a way to spin this to their benefit. And some of it's getting pretty pathetic. At one point they were saying, well, they had to shoot the Palestinians because the Palestinians were going to kidnap those Israeli soldiers, which was absurd. And now they're getting into the excuse that by killing a lot of Gazans very quickly, they would scare the rest of them away, and in the long run, lives would be saved. And what's really interesting is this author of this one piece, Dan Margoulet, talks about the battles taking place. And he said, more than convinced, the beginning of the fighting about 10 weeks ago is the massive shooting at the beginning of the battles has saved many Palestinian lives. There's only one problem. There are no battles. The Palestinians do not have weapons. They are protesters. It's a one-sided massacre. And this attempt to somehow equate the two sides as militarily equal is utterly absurd. The Palestinians have rocks and slingshots. And yes, they're using incendiary kites to try and set fires on the other side of the fence. But is that any different from when Israel comes on in and drops white phosphorus on their residential areas? Don't forget, just yesterday we were reporting on a story where Israel actually invaded central Gaza and bulldozed a whole bunch of agricultural fields, claiming they needed it for security purposes. They're starving these people, bit by bit, slow starvation. That's what's going on. All right, let's take a phone call. Laura in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'll tell you how Israel's fighting back. I watched Saturday night. You know, Jay Sekulow, he's also a lawyer of Donald Trump.
Yes.
He's got the AC, American Center for Law and Justice. Well, they've got a movie out. You could go to American Center for Law and Justice Films.com. And I saw part of the trailer. It was all about how Hamas is bankrolling the BDS movement, which was totally crazy.
Yes.
And how BDS is hurting so many people. They had a winemaker. The winemaker says, I can't sell my wine. And then they were talking about how the BDS is causing anti-Semitism on college campuses. I mean, just everything.
Yeah, well, they're laying on the propaganda real thick. I mean, and if you look at, that Palestinian medic, that 27-year-old girl that they shot through the chest with one of those expanding bullets, and then they tried to recover from that disaster by faking this video, which supposedly shows her throwing a tear gas grenade at the Israelis. The only problem being that her face is covered. You don't know that it's her. She throws that gas grenade a total of something like 10 feet, and there's nobody in the distance for her to throw it at. I mean, they're desperate to find some way. And, of course, you have America's corporate media like the New York Slimes are going along with this because that's what they're paid to do. But the world's eyes are opened, and they're realizing that, Israel is certainly not behaving like God's chosen people should be behaving. You'd expect a little humility. But Israel's the aggressor.
The name of the movie is Protecting the Promised Land.
Oh, boy, they're laying it on thick there.
Yeah. So I think really everybody should go to acljfilms.com.
I wouldn't waste my time. I wouldn't waste my time. We know it's going to be total bovine excrement.
I'd like to see what they're doing. And Jay Sekulow, he brags about being a Zionist.
Yes.
He says it all the time. He goes to college campuses and says, I am a Zionist, and you should be proud to be a Zionist, too. This guy doesn't hide what he is,
Well, the reason they're pushing so hard is the optics on both the Bloody Monday massacre and the shooting of the Palestinian medic. And by the way, the medics and journalists are being intentionally targeted. It does look bad. And there's no amount of propaganda and media spin that's going to make this go away. Like I said, it's Israel's equivalent of the Amritsar massacre, and it's not going away. Anyway, Laura, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Get on back. So again, we're talking about those butterfly bullets, and they are, first of all, illegal to use even if it was a real military conflict between Palestine and Israel. These kind of bullets are illegal to use because it's basically a solid slug that will unfold into 3 giant petals, if you will, and it's designed to cause maximum physical damage. And the Israeli snipers have been intentionally shooting at the joints of the Palestinian protesters. They shot one of Gaza's best-known soccer players. He will never play soccer again. They have shot some of these people with these bullets that just absolutely explodes the leg, and then refuse to allow them to go over to the West Bank where the hospitals have a chance of saving the leg. So they wind up being amputated. So it's basically Israel is intentionally disabling these people for life. It's a shoot to cripple policy. Israel, also, just to show that they're still in charge, has decided they're going to limit helium supplies to Gaza. Now, you may wonder why that's an issue. It's got nothing to do with balloons. Helium gas is used for a range of medical purposes and equipment, including MRI machines. And the hospitals in Gaza are already running out of everything that they need to operate in because of all the injured coming in from these snipers, Israeli snipers, shooting the protesters. And nothing else is getting on in. That freedom flotilla that's on its way probably won't make it any more than its predecessors have. And Israel just wants to show their arrogance here. And apparently Israel forces have taken over an archaeological house in Hebron and turned it into a military outpost. Now, archaeological house is a landmark. Sometimes it's called a heritage house, meaning it is a building that has been there that goes way back 100, 200 years. And Israel has a bad habit of commandeering these buildings and converting them to military outposts, and in the process, they wreck them because they want them to go away. They want the visible signs of the previous Palestinian culture gone. And they keep doing this over and over again. Now, one of the things that many people don't know about the Palestinian culture is they were world famous for their embroidery. It was just absolutely amazing. And as part of their outreach to the world, some years ago, I think it was about 11 years ago, the Palestinian Cultural Ministry arranged a global exhibition of Palestinian embroidery, traditional Palestinian clothing with embroidery. It was a traveling exhibit. It went from museum to museum to museum to museum until it got to Los Angeles, where the entire exhibit simply vanished from inside the secure cargo storage area. Now, Netanyahu is once again being questioned in a probe about corruption. And he's actually involved in 3 corruption scandals now. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with more news and phone calls after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm still trying to find out if the UN General Assembly vote has happened and what the results are, although it's expected to be overwhelmingly in favor of condemnation of Israel's behaviors. And of course, Nikki Haley is out there saying, well, attacking Israel has become a favorite political sport here at the United Nations. I don't know what they pay her for being such a liar, but it's not enough. If Pinocchio was real, her nose tip would be out by Chicago, I think, by now. All right. So, as we were saying before we went to the commercial break, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being questioned in a probe for corruption, and there's 3 of them. This is the so-called Case 4000. And it basically accuses Netanyahu from 2014 to 2017 using his former position of communications minister to have Walla, a news site run by Besek Communications giant, provide favorable coverage of him and his wife, Sarah, which you're not supposed to do. But there are 3 scandals now, 2 of them involving the purchase of these German Dolphin-class submarines and some kickbacks. And we keep hearing that indictments are imminent, but somehow they never happen, just like here in the Washington, D.C. Now, here is an interesting little story. This came out of forward.com. And the headline reads, Jared Kushner swore at Israel's ambassador for acting like he owned the place. Well, doesn't Jared understand that the ambassador does own the place? Anyway, the story goes back to February 13th, 2017, the day that Michael Flynn was forced out as National Security Advisor. Ambassador Dermer reportedly went to the White House to visit Donald Trump. And Dermer asked to meet privately with Flynn, prompting the White House aides to explain that he can't just come on into the White House and dictate whom he wanted to meet with. And at one point, in front of witnesses, Kushner swore at Dermer in the West Wing office, saying he wasn't going to do his bidding just because of his Jewish background. You're not going to tell us how to run these things. Don't try and push us around. Don't try and jam us. But there's a quote in this article that cuts right to the heart of the matter. And I quote, Dermer reportedly went to the White House to try to arrange for Trump to sign secret documents as other presidents had done, which the Israelis saw as an American commitment not to ask them to give up their undeclared nuclear arsenal. So once again, Israel's a nuclear power. They will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will not allow IAEA inspections. And yet they sit there pointing fingers at Iraq. They claimed Iraq was building bombs underneath Iraq's power station at Osirak. They blew it up. Nope, no bomb factory there. And now they're on the warpath against Iran. Meanwhile, of course, they've got a bomb factory under the reactor at Dimona. That secret was let out to the world by Mordecai Vanunu a long, long time ago. And still, you cannot get the U.S. government to acknowledge the fact that Israel is, in fact, a nuclear power. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a station break ID, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I already mentioned this a little bit earlier in the program, but again, it shows the influence that Israel supporters have in countries all over the world, not just the United States here. So there was the story, it was a Middle East Monitor ran it, and there was this French suburb that wanted to put up a sign renaming a street to Nakba. The sign was written in French and Arabic, and underneath the street name it proclaimed, in memory of the expulsion of 800,000 Palestinians and the destruction of 532 villages in 1948 by the war criminal David Ben-Gurion for the creation of Israel. And, Israel's just reacted. The Foreign Ministry spokesman, Manuel Nashon, saying it's a nauseating act to rename the street. And Israel's ambassador to France, Aliza bin Noun, accused the mayor of supporting Palestinian terrorism and inciting hatred. No, actually, it is the actions of the government of Israel that are inciting that disgust and that hatred. And every time somebody says, oh, you're being an anti-Semite or so, no, it's got nothing to do with the ethnicity. It's got nothing to do with religion. We're talking about the behavior of people at the highest levels of the Israeli government who should not get any special immunity from criticism from the world just because it's Israel. But they do like to claim that. Some years ago on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, they had a former member of the Knesset came on the show and openly admitted they scream anti-Semite just to shut people up because people are asking questions Israel cannot really answer. And they want to deflect the criticism. Israel wants to do what they're doing, like attacking the U.S.'s liberty. They don't want to be criticized for it, so they scream anti-Semitism. But you know something? Dismissing criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism is as legitimate as dismissing criticism of the Nazis by saying you hate the German people. And when you switch the context like that, you see how utterly absurd this whole thing is. Okay, now, as you know, the Air Force has a bit of a problem. They're running out of pilots. Their existing pilots are choosing to rotate out at the end of their enlistment. The Air Force has actually started a recall program for recently retired pilots to bring them on back. They're talking about new bonuses and financial incentives to try and keep those pilots in those cockpits, because it does take a long time to train up a good pilot. And you don't want to see them leave. But it looks to me like maybe these pilots, like so many other people in the armed forces, are realizing these wars are not honorable. They're not glorious. They are not necessary for the defense of the United States. They are, as Smedley Butler put it, racket. War is a racket. Now, last week, as you know, we reported that the entire B-1 Lancer bomber fleet has been grounded because of a fault discovered in the ejection seat. And they don't know how long it's going to take to fix it, but the entire B-1 fleet is grounded. Now we're learning that there was another emergency landing, and it happened right here in Hawaii back on June 1st, where they took off from Hickam, and they were flying on out, and they got a safety checklist warning, and they had to come on back and land. And they're not saying exactly what happened on the plane, other than it has nothing to do with the ejection seat problem that has prompted the global standout. And it's another reminder that for all the money we have poured in to our military, our weapons really aren't that good. They're not reliable. The F-35 is a boondoggle. There's absolutely no question it's a boondoggle. But still, the war machine is marching ahead. And we got our daily dose of booga booga from theorganicprepper.com. They ran an article, here's what would happen if a nuclear bomb was detonated on the ground in New York City. So they want you to start thinking and fearing nuclear bombs, nuclear bombs. Oh my goodness, North Korea has hit us with a nuclear weapon, or Iran has hit us with a nuclear weapon, or so forth and so on. So they go through some vivid descriptions about what's going on. And there is no question it would be a horrible thing, like these poor people in New York have not already suffered enough with 9/11. But the reality is that a ground detonation of a nuclear weapon is nowhere near as efficient and effective as an airburst at 5,000 feet. But this article seems to be implying that we could be hit with a terror attack where the nuclear weapon is delivered in the back of a truck. That's the only reason I can think of why they're going through this process, because in a real, honest military nuclear war, there will be no ground bursts, for the reasons I've already elucidated here. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And finishing up on the international and war news, quote from Bernie Sanders. The United States is fighting terrorism in some 76 countries. So that seems to be the number of countries the United States is militarily engaged with. They officially acknowledged 7. Caught everybody by surprise when those Americans got killed in Niger. Yes, you caught us. We're inside Niger. We were playing around there in Africa. You caught us. According to Bernie Sanders, 76 countries. I think we can safely say this is a world war. And I think we can safely say who the aggressor is as well. Turning to the domestic news, the big shocking news is that former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen is now saying he will cooperate with prosecutors from the Southern District of New York who've been overseeing this criminal probe against him. This is coming from ABC News. Michael Cohen has basically split off from the law firm that was representing him. And so he's going to cooperate. Now, obviously, a lot of people are saying that under threat of imprisonment, that Michael Cohen could be coerced into turning state's witness and even possibly lie to go after Donald Trump. Now, Cohen's family members and lawyers and the White House, they're going to have problems with this. They've been working on this multifaceted investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. How much would it take to get Michael Cohen to say, oh, yes, we did find evidence of Russian interference in the election, to stay out of jail? And needless to say, the Democrats are ecstatic. They're going to get Donald Trump They're finally going to get him. The globalists are ecstatic. We're going to get this nationalist guy out of the White House here. Now, over at Robert Mueller's special counsel office, he's got a little bit of egg all over his face. Because, as you know, at a time when people were criticizing him for this hideous waste of money and manpower for this Trump-Russia collusion, which had delivered nothing, Mueller tried to make it look like he was doing some kind of a job by handing out indictments, mostly for procedural crimes that didn't require special counsel, none of which were connected to the Trump campaign. But in the middle of it, he indicted a whole bunch of Russians and said they were involved, that's it, that's the path to the Russian collusion. And then he sat back, secure in his belief that the Russians would simply stay in Russia, and that everybody would simply go along with his accusations as if they were facts of evidence. Well, surprise, surprise, Bob, the Russians showed up. They showed up in court, and they're saying, let's move forward with the court case. And now Robert Mueller is scrambling to get judges to seal the evidence that the defense attorneys for these Russians would be entitled to under discovery. Meaning, he doesn't really have a case against them. It's as empty as his case against Trump. So that one backfired on him a huge, huge bit. Now, everyone's still talking about Russian interference in the 2016 election. Let's talk about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who openly rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders in favor of Hillary Clinton. Let's talk about Nancy Pelosi, who bragged that it was okay for the Democratic National Committee to ignore their own voters and rig the primaries. Isn't that interference in the election? Prior to it being shut down, Trump's Election Integrity Commission had found quite a bit of evidence of tinkering of those electronic voting machines. Why aren't we looking at that? Why aren't we looking at all the illegal immigrants who voted in the 2016 election? Why don't we look at all the times the United States interferes in other countries' elections? It's just more of this anti-Russia witch hunt. Now, part of that whole thing with Debbie Wasserman Schultz seems to be centering on this IT scandal that was inside the Congress involving the Awan brothers, specifically Imran Awan, and the fact that after the Awan brothers were locked out of the congressional computers for inappropriate access, read spying, Debbie Wasserman Schultz hired him. And she kept him on her payroll right up to the day he was arrested, trying to leave the country. Now, when the Awans were still working inside Congress, they found out that the Awans were using one congressional server, as if it was their home computer. They had kids' pictures on it, family photos, and so forth. But they also found a second server that seemed to be a target for data being sent to it. They discovered Dropbox, which most of you probably know is a cloud file storage service on several servers. This is absolutely against House rules. Now, the server that appeared to be used for nefarious purposes has vanished. The data on this server, the logs on it, show that it was being accessed at a frequency that indicated it was being used to expropriate information. And now it's simply disappeared. Oh my goodness, it was here just a minute ago. I think there was an espionage operation going on inside the Congress. I don't know if it was directly connected to the espionage operation I suspect Hillary Clinton was running at the State Department, but given the overlap at Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I think maybe that's the truth, and maybe that's the reason everybody is still working so hard to defend Hillary Clinton. And I'm not expecting anything significant out of that IG report either, because we've already gotten confirmation Rod Rosenstein has been basically pounding on Horowitz to soften it, to protect the image of the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But if that was right, If the Awans were spying on members of Congress and Hillary was spying on, well, a lot of other people, then they got the goods. They can blackmail them. They can destroy careers. That may explain sometimes where you'll have people like Trey Gowdy, who looked like one of the good guys, all of a sudden flip over and start defending the FBI spying on the Donald Trump campaign. Maybe they found something on him. I mean, back when J. Edgar Hoover was running the FBI, he was notorious for his secret private files, which were not files on criminals, but files on politicians. He used the FBI to dig out the dirt on all the leading politicians so he could control and blackmail them, up to and including President John F. Kennedy. And it was viewed as a time of intelligence agency tyranny. And now it looks like we're going through that same thing again. As far as Imran Awan himself, he has a job. He's been hired by Chris Gowan, a close former aide to Bill and Hillary Clinton. So that's where he's hanging out, waiting for his trial on federal charges. Still unanswered, who is paying for his defense? So let's get on back here to this Russian hack story. The Russian hacking of the DNC servers. Well, it's been 2 years since the allegation, and there's been no proof whatsoever. Now, data analysts are saying that the data that was removed, or copied rather, from the DNC server was not hacked because it was copied off way too fast to have gone out over the internet. It had to be copied to a flash drive physically on the premises and walked out of the building, and from there to WikiLeaks. And that's where, of course, Seth Rich comes on in, because he got murdered in what is still officially declared a robbery, even though his wallet, watch, and cell phone were not taken. And Julian Assange got really, really close to saying that Seth Rich was in fact the leak within the DNC. But we've got to bash the Russians. We've got to keep that anti-Russian narrative going here. But these are very stressful times for the American people, and apparently threats against members of Congress have skyrocketed. And last year, 2017, there were about 2,000 specific threats to members of Congress. And in response, the House Administration Committee has allocated $25,000 to each member of Congress in 2017 and again this year to beef up their personal and office security, prompting some members to hire bodyguards for events and equip offices with panic buttons and shatter-resistant glass. I understand one member of Congress actually bought himself some high-quality body armor. The American people are unhappy. And I don't agree with threatening members of Congress. You just make yourself a target by doing so. But I think we're seeing a government that's in the process of tearing itself apart. Okay, let's talk about the economic news here. And we know that we are being lied to on a massive scale about issues like the rate of inflation, the unemployment rate, and so forth and so on. It's all a bunch of lies. This article over in Blacklisted News is saying the real America right now has 21.5% unemployment, 10% inflation, and negative economic growth. And those sound pretty close to accurate to me. We know, despite the claim of 4% unemployment, there are 90 million Americans, legal American citizens, willing and able to work, who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. And the way the government does its little magic trick is if you're out of work for more than a few weeks, you get moved over to this other category, which is no longer counted when they calculate the jobless rate. But you can go over to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they've got a chart right there. The labor participation rate, sorry, rented lips, the labor participation rate is hovering mid-60%. Now, you can't equate that mid-60% participation rate with the official claim of a 4% jobless rate. They just don't line up at all. Now, the reason the U.S. government, of course, comes up with low inflation numbers is they leave out food and fuel in the calculation, even though food and fuel is where inflation shows up first. And by the way, Claire and I were at the local supermarket yesterday, and we don't eat a lot of meat anymore, but we were shocked to see the steak at $27 a pound. So don't tell me that there's no inflation going on here. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog saying that the economic collapse isn't coming. It's already here. Half of U.S. families can't afford food and rent. That is certainly true. It's a slow motion collapse. They're hoping you won't notice, but we are noticing. We notice it every time we go on out and we see that corroded and decayed infrastructure. We realize the economy is collapsing when we look at all the retail vacancies that are out there, when we look at all the homeless and hungry that are out there. It's our Buddha on the road moment. We understand the government is absolutely lying about the current economic situation. And all they can do is think about trying to conquer the world and bringing them back to Bretton Woods to prop up the U.S. economic system again. And I don't think it's going to work. I think they're going to lose this war, especially if it goes nuclear. And what's going to be left of this country, it's going to be a long time healing. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're discussing the economic news here right now. And over at Warren Buffett's enterprise, he has a valuation tool that he uses to assess the stock market, compares the total value of the stock market to the gross domestic product. And right now, they're saying that the U.S. stock market has never been more overvalued, never gripped by greater bubbled out mania than it is right now. And there's going to be a correction, and the stock market could crash 50%. Would be worse than 1929, and for many of those exact same reasons. Now, over in the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi is obviously running out of whatever it takes. Remember when Europe started to get into their economic woes, and Mario Draghi got out there and said, we're going to do whatever it takes to keep things going. But the big three central banks, the U.S. Federal Reserve, Japan, and the European Central Bank, are running out of time trying to hide the fact that they're imploding. And it all really looks good from the global news generated, but it's obvious that cracks in 2018 will become craters in the next few years. They're overextended. When they just create money out of thin air, it devalues all of the money that's out there. The Fed is trying to figure out a way to reel some of it back in, but they do so at the risk of crashing the stock market. They have really put themselves into a real corner here. And part of the reason is that constant push by Wall Street for deregulation. Don't worry, we've learned our lesson the last time. You can trust us. And it really doesn't work. The massive quantitative easing program has generated very significant imbalances, and the risks outweigh the questionable benefits. The balance sheet of the European Central Bank is now more than 40% of the Eurozone gross domestic product. Private central banking cannot be made to work over the long term because by design, it creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. The instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that bank than actually exists. And that imbalance between debt and currency grows and grows and grows and grows until it swamps the system. Private central banking is not about banking. It's not about the country. It's not about the people. It is a system of enslavement to trap people, nations, as debt slaves, to control them, to seize the real physical wealth of the country for themselves here. Getting a warning over here from, let's see, BTC USD, there's a warning going on out saying that Bitcoin could drop another 34%. Bitcoin has not been doing very well between the hacking of the servers and people sort of moving off of it. It's really not doing all that well. Poor old Tesla. I feel bad for them. It looked like a good idea, and I do think electric cars are the wave of the future. But Tesla is unable to produce his Model 3 for the price he thought he was going to be able to do it. And in an effort to hit production targets and try and get the company back into profits so he's not deserted by his stockholders, Elon Musk has announced they're going to fire 9% of the staff as part of a major reorganization. So it's kind of rough over there. I hope they make it. I hope they make it. It is a nice car. It's a nice concept. We'll have more about that a little bit later in the program. Story coming out of Russia Today on how China's new Silk Road to significantly boost global trade. And pointing out that right now the plan is that a cargo train can get from Beijing to Europe in just 36 hours. They can get to the English Channel. That's obviously a major, major threat to nations with large shipping concerns. And I think that's one of the reasons why the U.S. wants North and South Korea to remain kind of separated. Now, we have been talking over the last several years about how the United States is using paper gold to suppress the price of real physical gold in order to discourage people from emptying their savings accounts and their stock portfolios and going into precious metals for safety and security in these troubled economic times. And they're paying a huge price for it because Russia and China have taken advantage of the artificially lowered prices to stock up. And they have been buying physical gold left and right because the long-term plan is they're going to start backing their currencies, at least partly in gold, which are going to make those currencies far more attractive to the rest of the world than the United States dollar, which is backed up with nothing more than promises of future American slave labor. So you don't rig the system without there being some kind of a consequence. Anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. All right, so the other day, Claire and I were watching TV, and we saw this commercial by Wells Fargo basically saying, mea culpa, we did wrong. We're going to refocus ourselves on taking care of our customers. We're ending sales goals for our people, and we're reestablishing Wells Fargo. And they end with the tagline, Wells Fargo established 18, whatever it was, and reestablished 2018. And Claire and I just started laughing so much at how pathetic this was. And we've even heard a radio version of the same commercial. Well, it isn't like Wells Fargo did just one scandal. If you look at it and total it up, there are 87 Wells Fargo banking scandals. And it is a reminder that Jesse James may have been right when he said the real outlaws were the bankers. But you look down the list here, mortgage abuses, banking violation, False Claims Act, toxic security abuses again, banking violations, consumer protection violation, price fixing, anti-money laundering deficiencies, and it just goes on. And they're just racking up these huge fines, like $100 million a pop. And where does that money come out of? Well, probably not their own pocket. Comes out of the stockholders. Comes out of who knows. But it really is a major problem. And that's why banks do have to be regulated. Because left to themselves, they're going to get so caught up with profits, they're just going to go for it. That's what being a money junkie is really all about. Being addicted to money to the point where you're willing to cut corners. You're willing to break the law. And Wells Fargo's not the only one. We've seen other major banks like Deutsche Bank get hit with scandal after scandal after scandal. So it isn't just that our political leadership is corrupt. Our entire civilization has corrupted itself. People used to say that money's the root of all evil. No, that's not true. Money can do a lot of good. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil, where people who are just getting that money is the end all and be all. And as I've said before, I'm a great admirer of people like James Cameron or Steve Jobs or George Lucas, who became rich incidental to being very good at what they do. And some of them, James Cameron especially, are doing good things with their money. They're funding underwater research and all kinds of things. Now, a judge has just ruled, actually yesterday, that AT&T can in fact acquire Time Warner. And they're moving ahead with the acquisition. Apparently Comcast is trying to make a bid for Fox. And we're seeing this age of great monopolies being built up. The problem with monopolies, though, and the reason they used to be illegal, is when you have a monopoly, there's no control on the prices to the consumers. Once there's a monopoly, they figure they can charge whatever they want. And we have already seen with these other mergers, like Spectrum, as they grow, the price goes up, the quality of service goes down. So that's moving forward here. Getting on over to Europe, things are getting very, very testy in the European Union. And apparently Verhofstadt was screaming that Nigel Farage is an agent of Vladimir Putin. This was right in the European Union Parliament. And basically, he said that Farage is part of a fifth column inside the EU trying to destroy the bloc. And then he went on to call for an end of cooperation with nationalist leaders such as Italy's Matteo Salvini in order to protect the EU as it is today. So the globalists are getting desperate. They realize it's starting to come apart. The people of Europe, the ordinary people of Europe, they've had enough of this stuff. They've had enough of the problems coming on in with the open borders. They've had it with the European Central Bank's predatory behavior with the economy. Now, over in Great Britain, they're still trying to figure out a way to derail the will of the British people and somehow make Brexit go away. And there was this crowd-funded legal challenge to the British government's invoking of Article 50 of the Treaty of Lisbon, which is how you declare your intention to leave the European Union. And it went all the way to the High Court, which simply dismissed it, saying it's totally without merit. The whole basis of the lawsuit was that Britain had not, in fact, formally declared its decision to leave. Well, I think the intention has been stated, but they just kicked it out of court and said it's totally without merit here. A lot of people were looking at that vote that took away Parliament's final say over the Brexit as a victory for the Brexiteers. Others are saying the Brexiteers may have been played because the reason that bill was voted through without those amendments was the net result is if there's no deal by November the 30th, then the House of Commons must approve the course of action. And so now the talk is that they're going to let it go into the House of Commons, and they're expecting the House of Commons will vote against the Brexit. So this thing is just being fought out tooth and nail. And I can imagine George Soros is not getting a lot of sleep. He's already out there saying, oh, hang on just a second. This is Michael. Yes. All right, well, I'm continuing the show on YouTube. I'm still on YouTube. Okay? Okay, well, that was Mike in the control room. And apparently they've had a bit of a blackout in the control room. And so we're off the air on RBN, but I'm going to continue doing the show here on YouTube. And hopefully they'll get everything back by the time my show is over. And obviously I will not be taking commercial breaks from this point on, nor will I be able to take phone calls, which is going to make things getting a little bit more difficult. And that's funny, going into this show, I thought I might be the one to lose power because we had the power dip just before we went to airtime, but it's still up and still running. And yep, he's saying they're having to reset everything. Okay, there's a big stink going on with Italy, which apparently turned away a boat carrying 600 refugees from one of these NGOs. And it caused a big stink up in the EU. How dare you do that? You have to let the boat through. And Salvini is saying, no, we're not going to let the boats through, because if I let the boat with 600 people through today, there'll be another boat with 600 people tomorrow, and another boat with 600 people the day after that, and another boat with 600 people after that. And it can't go on like this. And he's saying that if the EU really still wants open borders, it's time for other countries like France and Great Britain to step up. Well, France is already overloaded with refugees. And so is Great Britain. There is no place to put them. This was all a plan by George Soros to if you want, lack of a better word, mongrelize the human race. Just blur us all together, mix us all up so we don't have a regional historical identity. They want us so confused we're not even sure what bathroom we're supposed to be using anymore to make it easier to control us. But this is the pushback. It is pushing back, and Soros was on TV the other day saying that anything that could go wrong has gone wrong. But the nationalists are winning. The populists are winning. The globalists, the liberals, they're suffering setbacks. There was a news story just now on Fox News about how during the primaries, the pro-Trump candidates seem to be winning. All right. Okay, let's see. I'm multitasking here, trying to do this story and also trying to see if we're getting rehooked up with RBN. Now, because of the fallout over the Italy's turning away that ship, tensions are very high, and as a result, Italy is threatening to cancel a major summit with France over Paris' criticism of Italy closing its ports. Well, I have a solution there. Send that ship to France. That should make Macron happy. But I can imagine Macron isn't all that eager to get more refugees in there because he's losing control over the Islam-dominated no-go areas in France. In fact, it's gotten so bad, he's asking the public for help. In a speech for 600 business and political guests in May, Macron called on the local mayors themselves, together with the population, to look for solutions for the problem in France's 1,500 no-go areas, or sensitive areas, as France calls them. 1,500 little sections of France where the French can't go anymore, not even the French government. Now, here's an interesting little article. This came out of Russia Today. And basically, it's one of the members of the European Parliament, Slavoj Zizek, and he actually used this language. The European Union must create a new world order to stop Donald Trump. He actually used the phrase, a new world order. And he's obviously one of the globalists, and sees Donald Trump being a nationalist president as the enemy, and then goes on to basically diss on him and saying, he's just being quirky about all this stuff. But they do make one observation, which is that Trump's vision is nonetheless based on the correct insight that the existing global system no longer works. That part is true. So let me ask a question. If we can't get globalism to work, why do we try more globalism? Just because it's going to make the global bankers happy? I've been opposed to a global government for a very long time. First of all, the larger governments get, the more oppressive they get. And a single global government would be the most oppressive Earth has ever known. Second, national borders serve the same function as fireproof doors in a building or watertight bulkheads in a ship. They contain an accident. So if you have a fire in an office, it's contained. But if you prop open those fireproof doors and watertight doors, yeah, it looks like things are getting better. You can go all over the place without restriction, but the first leak or the first fire destroys the system as a whole. A big reason for the devastation caused by the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud was economic globalism, because the U.S. and European banks were already heavily tangled up with each other. And what should have been an event confined to Wall Street quickly spread to Europe and brought several of their banks to the edge of ruin. And there was a lot of rumors about massive transfers of gold and gold certificates, gold bonds, to Europe to keep those banks propped up. Stuff that was done completely off the books. That may be one of the reasons why people are concerned if there's still any gold left there in Fort Knox. So, okay. And hopefully we're going to get something going here. We have talked about Sweden being this ultra-liberal government, feminist government, open borders. They've even got so far as to forbid their media from identifying the ethnicity of rapists. And rape is out of control in Sweden. Sweden has become the rape capital of the world because of all this open border refugee nonsense. But the Swedish people are starting to wake up because their populists is now the biggest party, meaning the next elections, Sweden will also have a Eurosceptic, close the borders, nationalistic government. And another story, this one out of Voice of Europe. Non-Western asylum seekers to cost Dutch society billions, study shows. Now, they're making a point here to break the refugees into two groups. And there's one group which are people who want to come and live and work and study in the Netherlands, and they pretty much take care of themselves. But the asylum seekers, they're just pouring on in and just sitting there on social services, and they are in fact costing the government a huge, huge amount of money. All right. Over in Macedonia, they're finally seeing a way forward for Macedonia to join the European Union, although why Macedonia would want to remains a mystery to me when you look at how bad things are in the EU. But Macedonia had been kept from joining by Greece over an unfortunate accident of history, because the name of the country of Macedonia is also the name of a northern Greek province. And they've been kind of at loggerheads, but finally, Macedonian Prime Minister said what they're going to do is they're changing the name of the country to the Republic of Northern Macedonia. Greece has dropped its opposition, and now, should Macedonia still want to, they can join the EU. I don't know why they'd want to. Anyway, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and I'm going to see if we're actually going to have a third-hour show or not. And, well, actually, I can't do a commercial break. That's my problem. Give me a second here. All right, I'm texting him to see what's going on here. Now, as you know, as part of the zero-tolerance immigration policy Trump has put on in, which I'm in agreement with, illegals, families caught coming across the border, the parents are arrested and thrown in detention centers or prison. The children are taken away from them. A lot of people are saying that's inappropriate. I would tend to agree. But they have brought so many of these children in, they're running out of places to put them. And now Trump is planning to put up tent cities for these kids. As we head into the hot part of the year, I imagine these tents will not have anything approaching air conditioning or even cooling fans. Now, I think the families ought to be kept together, but I think the families shouldn't be kept here in the United States. If they're coming across the border illegally, forget about arresting them and going through deportation procedures. Just turn them around and show them back across the border. Okay. Over in California, a ballot initiative has qualified for the November election, which will divide California into 3 new states, which I presume is going to be a Northern California, a Southern California, and a Central California. And I imagine a lot of that has to do with the ethnicity of Southern California, with all the illegal immigrants and refugees. And I think probably the Central California issue has to do with the fact that the Central Agricultural Valley of California has long felt neglected by Sacramento, especially when it comes to the issue of water and water rights. Because, as you know, agriculture takes water. And California's government has been selling California's water to companies like Nestle, who are pumping those aquifers dry, leading to serious water restrictions in California. And a lot of people are starting to leave California because just how crazy it's gotten there. But whether the ballot initiative will be voted for is one thing, and whether the California Supreme Court would allow it would be another, because there have been ballot initiatives passed in the past. The will of the people has been expressed, and the California government will say, no, we're not going to go along with that. We absolutely refused. We refuse to go along with that. So that will be a little bit contentious. When Claire and I lived there, I loved California. I loved the San Fernando Valley. I loved working in Hollywood. I love San Francisco, the brief time that we were there. But I keep getting these emails with photos of what it's like in San Francisco now. The place is just trashed. This apparently is the goal of the globalists. They can't bring these third world nations up to the living standards of the United States, so they're turning the United States into third world. All right, we're back connected to RBN, and we're back connected to doing what we're doing here. We're coming up on hour number 3 here. And interesting little story. Police are saying there was a man who tried to carjack 2 people and ran into a disappointment both times. Jacksonville officers arrested this 36-year-old Christopher Raymond Hill, charging him with strong arm robbery, carjacking with firearm or deadly weapon, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, and trespassing. Apparently, this guy robbed a Walmart liquor store, attempted to flee in a silver Ford SUV, but the vehicle would not start. So this criminal tried to carjack Scott Bearden at knife point, apparently actually cut him on his arms and legs, but Scott had a firearm and brandished it at the criminal and said, "Get on out of here," at which point the criminal jumped into the passenger seat of a woman's car in a Starbucks drive-thru. She got out of her car and grabbed her pistol from her trunk, pointing it at this guy. So, again, a reason to allow law-abiding citizens to defend themselves. Because without the guns, this guy would have succeeded. He would have succeeded in robbing the liquor store and in carjacking one, if not both, of these people. Well, he would have only carjacked one of them. But that's my point. The police are never, ever there when the crimes are being committed. They show up after it's all over. Now, apparently, online firearms retailer Brownells over the weekend had their popular YouTube channel terminated by YouTube, which is currently owned by Google, But apparently there was a huge public outcry, and the YouTube channel was back in service as of Sunday evening with some 22 million views logged across all videos. Apparently there's a lot of educational and gun safety material that is on that. And I can't understand why the gun grabbers would be opposed to teaching gun safety. I understand why the gun grabbers are opposed to gun violence and gun recklessness. But why would the gun grabbers be opposed to teaching people the safe handling of firearms? That they're not to play with, that they're not an open-air giant computer game. Meanwhile, Intuit credit card service has, without any warning, shut down payments on all gun purchases. I think somebody needs to have a class action lawsuit. And it's kind of funny here. The same liberals who are out there saying that companies can refuse to do business with gun owners are the same ones who screamed to high heaven when a baker refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. And it's another example of the double standards and hypocrisy that we see coming from the liberals. They just say what they want at that particular moment. Doesn't have to make sense. There doesn't have to be an overall cohesive platform or policy, which with the liberal Democrats there isn't. That's why they're playing all these cards. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. We'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're dealing with electricity issues here. And, of course, that entire control room is run with this little generator attached to a wire wheel. And there's a hamster in there. And I think maybe we need to get a second hamster in there as well to maybe get the voltage back up here again. All right, word has just come on in. The United Nations General Assembly, which was meeting in emergency session, has passed a resolution condemning Israel for excessive use of force against Palestinian demonstrators on the Israeli-Gaza border and calls for protection of the Palestinian civilian population. It was adopted with 120 votes in favor, 8 votes against, and 45 abstentions. So a lot of arm twisting going on, but they couldn't stop it from happening. And, of course, Nikki Haley is out there saying, no, it's Hamas. Please, it's Hamas. You're going to make me cry. Apparently, somebody's already thrown a big monkey wrench into this story over Macedonia merging with the European Union because Macedonian President George Ivanov is saying he will not sign the agreement on changing the name of the country. He's saying it's harmful to the country. He believes that Macedonia should go on being Macedonia. And he will not change the Constitution, and he will not accept the conditions for using the name for all purposes and opportunities. So Macedonia may actually be better off for that. We have yet another story about TSA ruining somebody's life. A gentleman named Rustam Kazazi is an American citizen, and hang on a second. Somebody was calling me right in the middle of the show, and I don't know why. So anyway, this guy, Rustam Kazazi, is an American citizen, was flying to Albania, which is where he's from, and he still owns a home there that needs renovation. And he had $58,000 in cash in his carry-on luggage, which he was carrying as cash because getting money from the U.S. to the Albanian banks is very difficult. A lot of it tends to disappear. And nobody had mentioned to him, you're not allowed to carry that kind of cash through a TSA checkpoint. So they took him to a private room, they strip searched him, and they took all of his money, which was his life savings. So the TSA has become the new highway robbers. Yes, you are free to pass, but if you're carrying too much money, we will lighten your purse, knave. It's what it is, it's robbery. When they're taking the life savings of elderly people who are trying to prepare for their retirement, that's not fighting terror, and it's not fighting crime. It is crime, and it is terror. Okay, here's a good one. Over at Bath Spa University, There's been another snowflake incident where students were taking an exam in their psychology class, and apparently they expected there was going to be a certain topic on there that they studied up for. And when the exam was handed on out, the topic wasn't there at all. And so these students actually began to cry in class like babies because the term that they thought was going to be on that exam wasn't. And now the school administration is saying these students who were traumatized by the test will be allowed to take it over again, just to be fair. Except that, of course, it's not fair to those students who didn't break out in tears and roll around on the floor. That's one of the things that I really don't like about this political correctness. They're trying to be fair to a certain group of people while being very unfair to others. They're placating a tiny minority at the expense of the majority. Now, here's another case of where this gender issue is coming back to bite people. Over in Sweden, in Malmo, they have this open-air swimming bath. It's a community pool. And it normally has gender-separated areas, as do most such pools. But one day a month, they turn it into a gender-neutral swimming pool, so the transgenders can feel perfectly comfortable. And I'll bet you can guess what's coming. The normal heterosexual men are taking advantage of the opportunity to wander through the girls' locker room and shower and just stare at the naked women. They don't think these things through, or they don't care. We don't care if the heterosexual women are shocked and upset. We just care about the transgenders. They're so precious. We have to take care of them. Yesterday we were reporting on how something like 2,000 child porn people were rounded up. And this stuff doesn't seem to get a lot of coverage in the American corporate media. But apparently Europol has been running something called Operation Rescue. And they've basically discovered an internet pedophile ring with up to 70,000 members, thought to be the world's largest, and they've uncovered it. Europol has identified 670 suspects and 230 abused children in 30 countries have now been taken into safety. More children expected to be found. 184 people have been arrested, and investigations in some countries are continuing. Most of these detained are suspected of direct involvement in sexually abusing children. These include, and get this list, teachers, police officers, and scout leaders. Apparently, one Spaniard who worked at summer youth camps is suspected of abusing some 100 children over 5 years. Now, what the heck is going on? Does this get back to my comment about the proliferation of psychiatric medication driving us all crazy? Because it isn't just suicide and mass violence that results from these. We did a correlative study that showed domestic violence is increasing with the per capita usage of these medications. Claire and I are seeing a lot more road rage today than when we first moved here. Is that linked in with people on prescription antidepressants? One of the things that SSRIs and other prescription antidepressants do is they interfere with your impulse control. In other words, when you're on these medicines, you'll get an idea, pops into your head, you've got no way to stop it. You just go forward with it. Because I'd sure like to know what the heck is going on, because this is unacceptable to have this happening to children. It's unacceptable. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to give you a little bit of an update On our local volcano, which is still volcanoing, but it seems to be steadying out a bit. There was another minor quake and ash ejection at Kilauea this morning. The total loss to real estate is now 700 homes. And basically, the Kilauea crater has almost doubled in size as the floor and the channel underneath it collapse. The USGS is trying to use LIDAR and GPS to model what's going on down there inside the crater to try and figure out if there are more large eruptions coming, or if this might be, hopefully, the we become, I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by all this stuff that's going on around me. So basically, this might be the beginning of the end. There was a press conference by FEMA and Hawaii's State Emergency Management Agency that basically came on out and said, for the first time, it feels like things are going our way. So hopefully, it's just going to slow down. We don't know how long it's going to last, but the worst may be over, he said, crossing his fingers. All right, somebody apparently said, called into the show off air and said we become more tolerant of crimes. I assume that this is in reference to the pedophilia issue. And yeah, it may be. And I think that's definitely a wrong direction to go, especially for things involving children. But we know that a big part of the reason that pedophilia was given a free pass was the involvement of the church. Nobody wanted to go up and risk being sent to the dark place after death by pointing the finger of guilt at Father O'Flaccid. So we got kind of really confused up, and certainly we have become very tolerant of high crimes and misdemeanors by our own government, such as the Clinton Foundation, Benghazi, the murder of Vincent Foster. And we shouldn't be tolerant. We should have a zero tolerance policy for things like this. We've lost our moral compass. We really have. Okay, so here's an interesting little story. This came out of Waking Times, and it's talking about questionable tactics used in vaccine safety testing, and safety is in quote marks. And they're going back to December of last year, where Slate magazine published an article about the human papillomavirus vaccine Gardasil, revealing how the safety trials for this vaccine actually weren't designed to properly assess safety. Now, Gardasil is supposed to prevent infection by certain strains of HPV virus, which in rare cases may cause cervical cancer if left untreated. Big money maker. Your health practitioner gets half the cost of that shot. They're recommending shots for little girls and little boys who will not be exposed to the possibility of sexual contact until after that first shot wears off, at which point you're supposed to get a booster. It's just another sales gimmick. However, trial data from Merck shows that Gardasil vaccinations may actually increase the risk of cervical cancer by 44% if the patient had been exposed to HPV strains 16 or 18 prior to the vaccination. Now, reported side effects of Gardasil vaccination include immune-based inflammatory neurodegenerative disorders, suggesting something is causing the immune system to overreact in a detrimental way, sometimes fatally. And we have seen that before. We're coming to understand, in point of fact, that a lot of the, all of a sudden, chronic diseases of the 21st century go back to reactions to vaccines that are messing up our gut biome, that are using chemicals for adjuvants that cause harm, peanut oil being one of the most obvious. When I was a kid, you know, and we had the one vaccine, polio, and it didn't have peanut oil in it, nobody was violently allergic to peanuts. And then they started using peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant, and all of a sudden, peanut anaphylaxis is a huge problem all across the country. And everybody has to buy and carry those EpiPens just in case they're exposed to a fleck of peanut dust. So it's just a racket. It's another racket. Okay, now talking about computers and other things like that. Over in Great Britain, their security minister is saying that there needs to be effectively a driver's license for the internet that will bring back online civility, because if everybody is forced to post using their real name and ID, that they're probably going to behave a lot better. Well, that hasn't been the case before when this has been tried. And there are a lot of people who will come up and say mean, stupid, and regrettable things, even if their identity's out there. They'll just say, this is what I think and what I want to do. And, of course, for the online troll companies, public relations firms, they'll just find some way to get around the system and have phony identities. Just like criminals today will have fake driver's licenses, fake IDs. So they're still trying to figure out some way they can control the internet. Good luck on that one. So as of yesterday, actually 2 days ago, net neutrality is officially dead. And everybody's saying, what's going to happen now? And more people are coming forward and saying that the whole idea behind ending net neutrality is totally bogus. The claim was that net neutrality was slowing deployment. And the rationale there is that if they have a high-speed lane they can charge more for, then they can speed up deployment because they'll have more money. Actually, they're probably going to put it into their own pocket. Now, Senators Wyden and our own Senator Schatz from here in Hawaii want to know why the FCC made up a bogus DDoS attack. And basically, the FCC was caught making up this story in a bizarre attempt to downplay public opposition to the net neutrality repeal. And basically what it was, after John Oliver covered the repeal, the FCC website was hit with people trying to find out what was going on. And the FCC didn't want it to go on out to the media that there was public outcry against the end of net neutrality. So they made up this bogus story. Oh, we were hit with a DDoS attack. One of those gosh darn evil internet people, they shut down our website. So they've been caught on that one. This is another corporate grab. It's the same way that Nestle is grabbing the people's water to corporatize it and commoditize it. The big telecoms are grabbing the people's internet for the same purpose. It's all about money and control. Over at Dixon's car phone, they've admitted yet another huge data breach. Hackers accessed 5.9 million customer bank card details. This comes just after 5 months after the firm was fined £400,000 for another cyber attack back in 2015. So there is something fundamentally wrong with our consumer level, at least, IT infrastructure. No matter how many patches come on out, there are still holes in it. There has to be a fundamental change to the way these machines are operating so that they cannot be hacked, especially secure servers. And the problem is, progress is a two-edged sword. The more complex and advanced we make these systems, the more loopholes are still in them. That's been a problem all along. Now, here's a very interesting little story. This came out of Middle East Monitor. The U.S. State Department has announced the imposition of sanctions on 2 Israeli companies that the authorities claim cooperated with a Russian cyber attack against American authorities. Now, this has nothing to do with the claim that Russia interfered with the election or hacked the DNC server back in 2016. But they're claiming that Russia and Israel were mounting cyber attacks against large American institutions, including vital energy networks. Now, here is a possibility that maybe it was just the Israeli companies and they were trying to frame Russia. Because Russia has no motive to go on in and attack our energy networks. So another false flag out there. We're back to demonizing Russia. Russia's bad. Russia's bad. All right, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Tesla letting go 9% of its employees that we would have a follow-up story. And apparently car makers are now being told they can no longer describe their vehicles as self-driving because there have been a number of crashes recently because the drivers / passengers are over-reliant on the technology. They believe it's a self-driving car, and they send the car off on its destination. They're reading a newspaper or something. The driving process in these cars is actually only partly automated, and you still have to be paying attention. I would never have one of these in my car, that's for sure. But apparently it's now come on down. You can't say the car is self-driving. They don't actually exist just yet. They're getting close. At least Cadillac is being honest. They have a system when you're driving on the freeway, it will keep your car automatically in the lane at the cruise control speed and make sure you don't hit the person in front of you. That seems to be working very, very well. We're going to take another break for commercials here. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media is now reporting on the United Nations General Assembly vote holding Israel responsible for the violence in Gaza. And they're still out there trying to salvage the situation. I was looking at like Washington Post and Reuters and the New York Slimes, and they're all out there saying, no, they should have blamed Hamas. It's all Hamas's fault. Hamas has fired over 100 rockets into Israel. Hamas is evil. And again, they're hoisting on their own petard because the world has opened their eyes and we're seeing for ourselves what's going on over there. And people are looking back at the entire occupation and the siege, and they're realizing it is ultimately wrong, and it is cruel, and it is inhumane. All right, we're going to get into some science news here. And as we mentioned the other day, there is a massive dust storm showing up on Mars. It's now engulfing 1/4 of the planet. And these storms are epic. They can cover the entire planet. They can last for months. And it is a big problem for any spacecraft on the surface that use solar power because the light just isn't getting down there. And apparently the Opportunity rover has stopped responding to NASA's communications. And NASA is assuming that right now the battery is likely so low that only a clock is still working that wakes the spacecraft up for periodic power level checks, so that if and when the power comes on back, the spacecraft will respond. Here is the issue. If those solar cells are still coated with dust when the dust storm ends, they're never going to get that back. And that's just an absolute shame because Opportunity's been doing wonderful work. Fortunately, this hopefully will not affect Curiosity, which is powered by a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. The only issue there, of course, is that these very, very fine particles of dust being blown into areas where they ought not to go. And as you know, they only just now got that drill at the end of the arm to operate again. So Mars can be a very, very tough place. It really, really can. Now, not too long ago, I was reporting on this scandal down in Chile where every one of the Catholic bishops resigned over this sex abuse scandal. And apparently, Pope Francis is refusing to accept the resignations except for 3. Bishop Juan Barros of Osoma, Bishop Gonzalo Duarte of Valparaiso, and Bishop Christian Caro of Puerto Montt. And Barros is accused of covering up the crimes of Father Fernando Caradima, who was first accused of abusing teenage boys in Chile all the way back in 1984. And it may be that it is this conflation of church and this kind of behavior that has convinced some people that it's somehow acceptable, which I find absolutely appalling. Story coming out of Blacklisted News, and it's rather interesting. There's this NCMEC report that shows 88% of missing sex-trafficked kids are coming from U.S. foster care. And it seems like there's this dark secret in our society that we don't want to talk about. And it's almost kind of weird because over in Great Britain, there's a pedophile issue, but they talk about it openly. They make jokes about it. Monty Python used to go to town about it all the time. But if this is really what's going on, and it's not just media hype of something else, if this really is going on to this scale, something has gone horribly wrong with the soul of our civilization. You just don't treat kids that way. I'm sorry. I have no sympathy or tolerance for that. You let kids stay kids for as long as they can because growing up is a one-way trip. You don't get to go on back to believing there's a Santa Claus. When you steal that kid's innocence prematurely with this kind of behavior, that really is a sin, I think. Now, Robert De Niro, as you know, has come under attack for his standing up there at the Tony Awards and screaming blank Trump twice and getting a thunderous standing ovation for it. Trump has already fired back, saying that Robert De Niro has a low IQ, which I don't think that's true. In fact, I think that kind of an insult was beneath Donald Trump. He could have been a little bit more creative, you know, and other people are coming to De Niro's defense, saying that when it comes to criticizing and attacking Donald Trump, there is no such thing as too far. And I disagree with that. I want to keep the discussions civilized and dignified and productive. And there's nothing productive about standing up on the stage at the Tony Awards and shouting blank Trump. That doesn't get you anywhere. It just increases the animosity. Okay, we're going to take another commercial break here. Please join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And just now, this second, I put up this video footage at whatreallyhappened.com. It's going to take about 5 minutes for it to percolate through the caching system. And the video was shot and posted today. It shows Ukrainian armor heading toward Donetsk. And they're talking about 30 tanks, 5 or 6 BMPs, and several auxiliary pieces of equipment, as well as personnel transports. Now, remember, earlier in the show, we were saying that Donetsk claimed to have intelligence that Ukraine is going to stage a false flag attack that will target a European Union delegation that's supposed to be touring the area to look at the humanitarian crisis. And we know, going back at least a month, that Ukraine appeared to be getting ready for a massive military operation in the Eastern Republic. So it looks like it is unfortunately very much on. All right, so we're talking about Robert De Niro and the way he was screaming at the president, which I think is disgraceful, and it's demeaning, not to the president, but to De Niro. And I used to have a lot of respect for him, but that's gone now. That's gone now. But apparently De Niro has other problems of his own. Apparently, The Intercept is saying that Robert De Niro exploited Hurricane Irma to build a resort in Barbuda. In other words, I mean, De Niro's very, very wealthy. Following Hurricane Irma, he simply went on down there and exploited the desperation of those people and apparently bought up the land where he's going to build this resort. So, great humanitarian there. And there's been a controversy about it, and De Niro refuses to discuss it. Now, here's an interesting little story. NASA can get very touchy about space artifacts, things that flew in space or came from space. And there have been some unfortunate incidences over the years where people had items that had been given to them, and NASA came along and said, no, you can't have that, we're taking it back. There was one case where one of the actual moonwalking astronauts had kept his little booklet, his timeline of what he was doing. Just paper and ink and stuff. And he decided he was going to auction it off, and the proceeds would go to benefit charity. And NASA came on in and said, no, that's our property. You can't have that. And a lot of people are saying it's a little too tight control, because in some cases the control isn't there. Following Apollo, NASA, specifically the U.S. government, made gifts to the leaders of the rest of the world of small little lucite paperweights with a little tiny chip of the moon in it. Half of those are now unaccounted for. They don't know where they're going to go. And there was another story where several years ago, some people actually succeeded in breaking into the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston and stealing a file cabinet full of lunar samples, which were unfortunately hopelessly contaminated, where certain classes of research are no longer possible on these samples. So, getting on back to this story. Apparently, over in Cincinnati, there's this lady, Laura Chicho, and she's filed a lawsuit in federal court over a vial of moon dust that was given to her by Neil Armstrong. And what makes this case very, very different is that there was a note by Neil Armstrong saying, this is a gift from me to you. And she basically wants a guarantee that NASA's not going to come and take it. Now, Chicho's father, Tom Murray, was a pilot with the U.S. Army, spent a lot of time together with Armstrong. And sometime in the 1970s, Armstrong gave the violet moon dust along with a handwritten note to Murray's little girl. And so Chicho is now suing NASA because the agency has a history of seizing suspected lunar material from private citizens. It's not just lunar material. Again, with the case of the astronaut, they're seizing flight manuals. And I agree that to an extent this material should be in museums for everybody to share. But little tiny things like the ballpoint pens and whatnot. Of course, remember the trouble Gordon Cooper got over those Mercury dimes that he took into space with him. He was going to hand them out as souvenirs after he got done. Oh, and by the way, during missions, most recently the shuttle, there is a personal pouch for the astronaut. It's not very big, about the size of a loaf of bread, but the astronaut can put whatever they want in there. Pictures, something to read. Very often, the astronauts do stash it up with all kinds of things that they're going to give out as souvenirs. But none of them are official NASA artifacts, so NASA doesn't talk about that. But it is a little bit uptight. And I hope this lady wins her lawsuit, because it was a gift from Neil Armstrong. And he did write the note, and that basically documents it. Okay. Seem to have our electricity back up. I did check. There actually is a power outage near to where RBN is. Apparently, I don't know if that's what tripped off our issues or not. Over off the Norfolk coast, the world's 5th largest wind farm has just opened. It features 91 turbines, and these turbines are each greater in diameter than the London Eye. The blades on these turbines are 250 feet long. They're made at the Siemens Gamesa Blade Factory in Hull. And so this thing is just huge, and it is just absolutely enormous, and I hope it works. The problem is some of these wind farms have run into trouble when it stops being windy, which things have been known to happen like that. Okay, now, somebody, Member Story, just put up this article, and I think this was in response to my comments about how San Francisco, Los Angeles, North Hollywood have deteriorated. Because every once in a while, I'll go into Google Earth and I'll use the Street View feature to go back and visit places I used to live. And they're all greatly deteriorated. It's very heartbreaking and disappointing to see. Nothing's being kept up here. So somebody put up this map that shows San Francisco is in fact covered with human poop. part of it's cultural. I remember when I worked at Magic Mountains, it was not unusual to see the Hispanic guests just have their kids relieve themselves on any patch of grass. I mean, I remember one time they were standing right in front of the restroom, but apparently they couldn't read that that was the restroom. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog, again saying the stock market is hideously overvalued. Another article, this one from Redress Online, asking, this is Stuart Littlewood, by the way, will the slaughter in Gaza finally prick the international conscience for firm action? I think it has. I think it has. I think Israel finally had its Amritsar, and the world is noticing, and we're not going to be silenced by screams of anti-Semite and Palestinian terror. There's a website called ifamericans.org where the actual numbers of who is shooting at who by how much are carefully cataloged. And you've got Israel's agents over at the UN screaming that Hamas has fired 100 rockets into Israel. Well, contrast that with the thousands of rockets and bombs Israel has dropped onto Gaza. The issue is the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, have as much a right to their own country as Israel does. And I know I'm going to get letters saying, no, they do not. But let's be fair. Israel's been around for a while. They should have a right to a place called Israel, but Palestine needs a right to a place called Palestine. And what is behind all of this suffering and all of this war and bloodshed is this arrogant presumption of entitlement by Israel, that they're allowed to have it all and take it all, and nobody else is allowed anything. Because if Israel would just grant to Palestine that which it demands for itself, a recognition of a right to exist, a lot of these problems would go away. You've got all these nations in the Middle East who are ready to recognize Israel's right to exist as soon as Israel recognizes Palestine's right to exist. But Israel continues to say, no, there's no Palestine. There's no such thing as Palestinians. And then, like we reported earlier, they start moving the military into the archaeological remains of the Palestinian people in order to destroy them. I think the world is outraged. I'm outraged. This is unacceptable. This is absolutely unacceptable. First of all, to be shooting at medics intentionally, to be shooting at journalists intentionally, to be aiming at elbows and knees to permanently cripple these people with these expanding bullets. These are war crimes. There's absolutely no question in my mind that these are war crimes. So David Steele over in the House of Lords is saying, we cannot allow the Israeli government to treat Palestinian lives as inferior to their own, which is what they consistently do. Well, the Israelis treat everybody's life as inferior to their own. That's been a big part of the problem. God's chosen people. We're special. We're elect. So Lord Steele of Achewood did a speech in the House of Lords debate saying that this House takes note of the situation in the Palestinian territories. And what he said was, my lords, I put in for the ballot for today's debate just after the terrible slaughter of 62 Palestinians inside the Gaza fence, which included 8 children. I should at the outset declare a former interest. I served for 7 years as president of the charity Medical Aid for Palestinians, and I'm delighted to see that the current president, the noble Baroness Lady Morris of Bolton, is to speak in this debate. During that time, I visited Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza several times, once touring Gaza just after the CAS-led operation, when I saw for myself the wanton destruction of hospitals, schools, and factories in what was described by David Cameron as one vast prison camp. Before anyone accuses me of being one-sided, let me also say that I spent an afternoon with the local Israeli MP in the Ascalon area of the south of the country and fully understand the intolerable life of citizens there threatened by rockets fired by Hamas from inside Gaza, or it should be noted by somebody pretending to be Hamas. Because if you notice, those rockets never hit anything. It's kind of hard to be terrorized by a rocket coming out of Gaza when all they ever hit is dirt. And every time Israel wants to go on in and bomb the heck out of Gaza, there's a convenient rocket flying over that fence. They're still bashing the World Cup. They're trying to scare people from going to Russia for the World Cup. The latest two is, if you go to the World Cup, don't have sex with foreigners. There's all kinds of diseases all over there. And the other one is leave your cell phones at home because the KGB is going to hack into your phone and steal all your secrets. I mean, they're really trying to wreck this experience. How petty. How absolutely childish. Apparently, the rush to robotization is continuing, and we're hearing from McDonald's that they're going to go full kiosk in a couple of years. We're hearing from Citibank that they want to go more machine, less people. We're hearing from customer service organizations that with the advances in natural language processing and artificial intelligence, that a lot of customer service phone bank jobs are now going to be run by computers. Ooh, isn't technology wonderful? And yes, it is, don't get me wrong. But you're missing the important point here. In order for us carbon-based life forms, us human beings, to go into those shopping malls and buy the products you are selling, we have to have jobs that pay us enough money to not just survive, but to go into those shopping malls and sell the products you're selling, or buy the products you're selling. Otherwise, that consumer economy collapses. And prior to the 2008 meltdown, consumer spending was 60% of the U.S. economy. And it's already collapsing. You can see that from all the retail vacancies all over the malls of this country. And if this rush to automation is not checked and put under some kind of control, we're heading toward a society where you're going to have shopping malls with all these robots standing around with absolutely nothing to do because there are no human customers in there. Now, before it actually reaches that part, we're going to see these stores closing and these robots basically being sold to the junkyard. But that's where this is heading. This is a bad direction. You know, one of the things I liked about the movie Dave, where this celebrity impersonator takes over for the real president, is his regular day job before he became president was running an employment agency, a temp agency. And so he came into the White House with this idea. People need jobs. They don't need welfare. They don't need basic universal income. They need jobs because with jobs comes not just money, but dignity and self-respect. And I know there are people who are perfectly happy living off the social system and the SNAP cards and everything. But by and large, most people, they want to have a job. They want to feel they're pulling their own weight. They want to have something they're proud to talk about. I work down here and I make these and I make them as best as I can. But this rush to placate the stockholders for just one more quarter by firing all the employees and replacing them with machines, you got to start looking long term. That's a bad path everybody is on. It's an extension through cybernetics to the path we were on with the offshoring of jobs, where companies started offshoring jobs and, oh, look, we're into profits now. We're making more money. And then everybody said, oh, well, we're going to fire all of our local people and offshore the jobs. And then all of a sudden, we're in retail Mageddon, and all these supposedly smart CEOs are standing around looking at the red ink on their quarterly statements and wondering, what the heck happened? What the heck happened is that you forgot your customers collectively are also your employees collectively. And if you fire your employees, you have no customers. Because the few money junkies can't support the entire consumer economy all by themselves. We're going to take another break for commercials. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And got a breaking story here. This is coming in from Anti-Diplomatica over in Italy. And the story is basically that a United Arab Emirates naval vessel has been struck by Houthi missiles off the coast of Yemen. And apparently the vessel is currently on fire and has taken tremendous damage. Now, I'm still working to get further details and confirmation on this, but it looks like the war is really on in that part of the world. It gets serious when you start shooting each other's warships. So we'll see what's going to happen. And again, I'm going to stay on top of this story after the show is over. Getting on back to other things here. Apparently, Naftali Bennett is out there being quoted by Middle East Monitor saying that the West Bank will soon become the state of Israel. So again, that's always been Israel's goal. They don't want a Palestine there. They want it all. It was only a week ago we were hearing senior people in the government of Israel saying, let's just go into Gaza, bomb it all out, get it over with. Everybody will forget eventually. The corporate media will cover it up for us. So as we head into an era of war, we know who the aggressors are. It's not the Palestinians, it's not Iran, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's not North Korea. Remember what we said earlier in the show. Bernie Sanders says the U.S. is militarily engaged in 76 countries. That's a lot of war. And I think at this point we can say, yeah, it is a world war. And that a lot of what's going on is in fact being hidden from you. Because I did not know that the U.S. was in 76 countries militarily. I know there's 7 acknowledged wars and presumably a handful of covert operations. But 76, that's a lot. That's a good chunk of the world. So we'll see what's going to be happening here over in Yemen, but it's looking more and more serious. And I feel really bad for those people because they didn't do anything to deserve this other than want to live their lives and run their own country. That's it. The same thing any sane person would want. But we seem to be returning to an age of colonial empire, of the large nations going on out and reconquering the smaller nations and turning them back into vassal states. And I think if you study any sociology textbooks, they'll point out that the colonial period was generally not very good for the people living in those colonies, which is what led to situations like Mahatma Gandhi in India. So, all right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know by face-to-face meeting. Let's bring back the art of the conversation, or email. Forget about social media. It's totally filtered, totally scrubbed right now. And please donate to RBN. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.